Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the National Veterans Technical Assistance Center's webinar, Stand Down Development. My name is Cindy Borden, and I'm the Assistant Director of Technical Assistance and Training for NCHV, the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. And we are one half of the NVTAC. We work together with an organization called Advocates for Human Potential. We're going to have a great webinar today. We are really lucky to have Nathaniel Saltz, the Program Director from the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans with us, and he'll be talking in just a few minutes. Before we get started, there's just a few logistical things that I need to go through. First, you may have noticed that you cannot talk on the call. All the phone lines have been muted, and that is to avoid having to listen to anyone's music if someone has to put us on hold or if folks are having multitasking and have other things happening in their office. So the phone lines are muted. You will not be able to speak during the call. Instead, you will not be able to ask questions, therefore, by phone, but instead you will be able to ask the questions through the chat function of the webinar itself. If you look to the right of your screen, you'll see this little dialog box bubble that looks sort of like a cartoon bubble. If you click on that, that will take you to the chat function, and then you just select to Q&A group, and you can type your questions in there as they come up. We'll be collecting those questions, and we will leave time at the end of the webinar to answer as many of the questions as we can possibly get to. If there are questions that we're not able to answer today because we've run out of time, we will be collecting all of those questions into a fact sheet, and we'll put those questions with the answers into a fact sheet that will be posted on our webinar. On our website. We are recording this webinar, and the entire webinar, along with the slide presentation and the fact sheet, will be available on our website for viewing. It usually takes a couple of days for those materials to get uploaded to the website, but they should be there by early next week at the latest. So again, any questions that aren't answered will be posted in that fact sheet. But please, throughout the webinar, use that chat function if you have questions that come up. And as I said, we will be saving time at the end to answer those questions. You'll also be receiving a SurveyMonkey link from me later today with about 5 or 6 questions just asking about the webinar itself. Please take 5 minutes to complete that survey. They're really important to us. They help us determine what we're doing well, what we need to improve on, how helpful the webinars are, if there's any other answered questions. And there is a place in that survey to put in unanswered questions as well. In case you think of something after the webinar is over, you can ask your question through that survey function as well. So for the webinar today, we are talking about stand-down development. We've already done the logistics in the first part of the introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the philosophy of stand-down, what it means. We're going to talk about the different kinds of events and the partners that you want to think about engaging for a stand-down. We're going to have a grantee perspective from Nathaniel Saltz from NACV that I mentioned earlier, and he's going to talk a little bit about what stand-downs look like in Minnesota. And then we have a little bit of information about resources that NCHV has around stand-downs. We are sort of the keeper of the stand-down materials, and we have a lot of resources that can be really helpful for you. As we get started, this is a fairly basic introduction to stand-downs. It is designed for folks who haven't had that much experience with stand-downs. Those of you, if there are folks on the call who have more experience, that's great. You'll have a chance to share some of that through the chat function as well. But I would like to do just a quick poll. If you could take just a minute to answer this poll about how much experience you have with stand-downs. Either you're an expert, so you've hosted a lot of them, you're a journeyman, you've participated in some, maybe you've hosted 1 or 2, an intern, you've participated in a couple, but you haven't hosted it, you're sort of in that phase, or a novice, which means you don't really have any experience with stand-downs at all. And we're going to take just a second to see how that's going. Okay, we've got quite a few folks already coming in. And it looks like we have probably, I would say, about 2/3 of the folks on the call are either in the novice or the intern category, about a third in each of those. And then we have about a third of the folks who are kind of in that journeyman category. So perhaps later you can also share some of the things that you've done as well and through that chat function, and I'll be able to share that with the rest of the group. And we have a couple folks who are experts. So for those of you who are experts, we always want to hear your expertise and share what you have to offer with everyone else. So thank you all very much. So what is a stand down? What are we talking about here? A stand down is generally a 1 to 3 or 4 day event, and it's geared towards homeless individuals and their families, both veterans and non-veterans. It can go for either one. It's led by community service providers, and usually the VA Medical Center has some involvement. The founders of Stand Down were two gentlemen, Robert Van Kuren and Dr. John Natchison. And the first Stand Down was actually held in San Diego in 1988. With the support, both Dr. Natchison and Mr. Van Kuren worked for what was then Vietnam Veterans of San Diego. It's now called Veterans Village of San Diego. And it really was a community-led effort based on what they were seeing. At the time, there was not a lot of discussion of homeless veterans. And the clients that they were serving in the various programs that they had, they were noticing that they didn't have a fixed address. And this was part of an effort to figure out how to serve those veterans in a better way. And the key piece here is that the philosophy of Stand Down is that Stand Down is a hand up. It's not a hand out. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm noticing as well that there's a couple folks that are having challenges with the audio through their computer. If you're having that issue, please dial the phone number, which is 877-366-0711, and enter the passcode, which is 264-32122. It is in the chat box information. Sometimes the computer audio gives us some challenges, so the best audio quality is through the phone call. So a little bit more about what a stand down is. The stand down name and concept actually traces its roots back to the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War, when combat troops were exhausted and really need a chance to sort of regroup, they were actually told to stand down. And what that meant was they left the battlefield and they went to a place that was relatively safe and secure. We all know that in war, no place is completely safe and secure, but a place of sort of relative safety and security to a base camp. And the idea was while they were at this base camp, it was a chance for them to regroup. They could rest, they could recover mentally, physically. It was a chance for them to take care of all their personal needs. So personal hygiene, get clean uniforms, shower, get some hot meals, get medical attention if they needed it, or dental care. Take care of mailing letters home or receiving letters from home, all of that sort of thing. It was also a place for them to enjoy camaraderie and connect to their fellow soldiers and friends in a safe way. And that is what the heart of the stand down is. It's the idea that we want to give veterans the opportunity to come to someplace safe and feel connected. The original version of that was to, recover from war, to cover from the battlefield. And if you think about what a lot of our homeless veterans are living through day to day, it's a different kind of battlefield, but it is exhausting physically, mentally, and they need a safe place where they can recover and take a minute and rest and regroup. And that's what the stand down is about. It's really giving them that opportunity to connect to a time when they felt safe and secure, when they felt good about themselves, and when they had that sense of community and camaraderie. So the resources and the things that we're going to talk about that are provided during a stand down are all really important, but the heart of the stand down is not the resources. It's that sense of connection, camaraderie, support, and safety, and that's what will keep veterans coming back to your stand downs year after year after year and really being invested in them. So this is just a picture of a stand down. This is a fairly large stand down. So for those of you who are new and trying to plan one, your stand down may not look like this, but this is just to give you a sense of what it can look like. Just a picture of that, again, that safe, secure environment that has that feeling of when they were in a traditional stand down. It has the tents, it has that feeling. So just that piece of it. So what we're going to talk about now, since we spent a couple minutes just sort of getting the sense of what the stand down is and what it means, is the different kinds of stand downs. There are 5 classifications and then sort of an other, and we're going to go through each of these in more detail. But Class A is the traditional stand down event. Class B and C are the Homeless Veteran Resources Fair, either 2 or 1 days. Class D is that Homeless Veterans Health Fair. Class E is the Job Fair. And then 4 is an other kind of event that doesn't really fit into any of those categories. What's important to note is that all of these categories, regardless of what kind of stand-down event you're having, they do need to have some connection to VA healthcare. Even the Homeless Veterans Job Fair, which says Job Fair, and we'll talk about that, should have some connection to healthcare services through the VA, some referral mechanism or something like that. Okay, so Class A is the traditional classic stand-down. It's a 3- or 4-day event usually, and it's for homeless veterans and their families or significant others only. The services provided are many. Their shelter is provided. It's not always provided. It's not mandatory to provide shelter, and I think Nathaniel is going to talk a little bit about how that works in Minnesota. But in many cases, shelter is provided during the stand-down. It's not always required. But there are housing services provided, so referral to housing programs and those sorts of things. Food is provided. Personal care like haircuts, personal care kits, clothing, those sorts of things. ID services. Healthcare screening for HIV/AIDS or hepatitis, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how you'll connect to the VA as a partner to provide this healthcare screening piece, but just keep that in mind. There also may be healthcare services. Sometimes there are healthcare professionals that will provide actual services on site during a stand-down. Eye care and dental care are also sometimes included in stand-downs. For eye care, there are sort of different requirements for who can pay for where the funding can come for eye care. And we're going to be doing another webinar next week on stand-down financing, and we'll get into the particulars of that, about which kinds of money can be used for which kinds of things, allowable expenses, and all of that. But eye care is sometimes provided. Department of Labor stand-down money can actually be used for non-prescription glasses, like reading glasses, but prescription glasses would actually need to be funded, need to come through a VA prescription. As far as dental care, that's something that if you're interested in providing that, you'd need to start really early and possibly look to maybe a dental school or someone else to provide those services during your stand-down. Again, that's a longer-term piece of service to provide. VA benefits counseling, general benefits counseling, that's often included in, again, we'll talk about partnering with the VA to get someone there to help with that service. Substance abuse counseling and recovery groups, often during stand-downs there are recovery group meetings that happen, again, as part of that safe, secure environment and connecting with other veterans. There are many times group meetings that happen during the stand-down itself. Legal services or referrals for legal services, employment services, so employment counseling and job referrals, and then also spiritual services, so all sorts of things that help create that sense of community. And that can be sometimes a musical celebration or a guest speaker or some kind of open mic event, all sorts of things. And again, Nathaniel can share if anybody has questions about specifically what he's done in that area. So that's Class A. The next kind of stand down is Class B and C, and I put these on the same slide because they're really the same thing. It's just difference based on how long they are. So a Class B stand down is 2 days, and a Class C is 1 day. This is the most common kind of stand down events that people host. The classic stand down, that 3 or 4 day event, is less common. It does require a lot more planning and a lot more resources. So most folks do this B or C kind of stand down. The participants are similar that are involved in this. Again, it's homeless veterans and their families. And the kinds of services that can be provided are similar as well. Again, not every event is going to have all of these services, but some combination of these services should be part of your stand-down event. And again, there needs to be some connection to VA healthcare benefits through whatever kind of event that you're having. The next event is a homeless veterans health fair. This is a one-day event. It's just for homeless veterans. It's not for their family members. And this is really focused on the health side of things. And this includes healthcare screening that we talked about, actual healthcare services, referrals for eye care and dental services, benefits counseling, substance abuse counseling, and then referrals for housing. The difference here is that the primary focus on this is really healthcare services with a few other referrals, and this is generally just a one-day event. And our last category is the Homeless Veterans Job Fair. This also is a one-day event, and it's geared specifically to homeless veterans. And here the focus is on jobs and employment. Because it's connected to a stand-down event, it does need to have that connection to VA benefits and health care, but it's generally focusing on job referrals and employment counseling. They may also have some referrals for housing services as well, but it is primarily a focus on job services. I'm just getting a message from one of the folks who's one of our experts who is talking about immunizations happening at being one of the healthcare services that is offered at many stand-down events. So thank you, Steve, for sharing that. Yes, immunizations are often included, I would say more often than not, they're included for things like the flu or shingles or other immunizations. Okay, so now that we have kind of a general understanding of the different kinds of events, it's really important to think about, if you're starting to plan a stand down, what does this look like? And if you get only one piece of information from this webinar, it should be this. No single person or no single organization can do a stand-down event on their own. You need to have partnerships. You need to have other folks that you're working with. It really is just not something you can do by yourself. You have to have partners. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the kinds of partners that you can have and what they can offer and what you want to look for in choosing those partners and building those partnerships. First and foremost, because this NCHB and the National Veterans Technical Assistance Center works closely with the HVRP grantees, I want to make it clear for HVRP grantees that you do have to apply separately for stand-down funds. It is not part of your HVRP grant, so it is a separate application. But for those of you who aren't in HVRP grantees, I want to encourage you to reach out to HVRP grantees. You don't have to be an HVRP grantee to apply for stand-down funding. Again, next week when we talk about the financing side, we'll look more in depth at what the application requirements are in the financing piece. But you don't have to be an HVRP grantee to apply. If you're not, I do suggest that you connect with both your local HVRP grantee, if there is one, and your VA medical center, because one or both of those groups may already be hosting a stand-down event of some kind in your area. And so if that's the case, you want to connect with them to make sure that you are not repeating or sort of saturating the market or doing things, making an effort that you could actually join on an existing effort. I did have a question about what HVRP stands for. I apologize for not clearing that up. I talk about it every day, so I forget that not everyone knows. It's the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, and that is a federal grant from the Department of Labor that is designed to help homeless veterans get competitive employment. So these grantees are working with this population, and many of them do have been doing stand-down events for a long, long time. So your first step is to connect in your community to see if anyone is doing a stand-down event, your HVRP grantee if there is one, and also your VA medical center. If they aren't, or if they are, you can connect with them and see how you can maybe perhaps coordinate with an existing event already. But the HVRP grantee can play a lot of different roles. If there isn't one in your if there isn't a stand-down in your community, the HVRP grantee can actually take on that job of being the primary kind of coordinating entity and applicant for the funds, because there does need to be one organization that is financially responsible for any stand-down funds that you apply for, and that's sort of the coordinating body. You also want to think about getting partners and getting engaged to plan your stand-down event. So your HVRP could certainly be on your planning committee if they're not the primary lead. They are, as I said, they work with the population, and so they do have that experience and those connections. Depending on the scale of your stand-down, you'll have a planning committee, but you may also have an event committee. The planning committee does everything like helps find funds, helps find resources, helps ensure that all of the services that you want to provide at your stand-down are supplied in some way. You may also have another committee that works specifically on the logistics, the day of the event, those sorts of things. In addition to being on that committee, because the HVRP grant is the Department of Labor's grant for homeless veterans seeking employment and helping them find that competitive employment, your HVRP grant can be your employment connection for supplying employment services and referrals to employment services at your stand-down. They can also help with finding other referral sources. They know a lot of other organizations that work with the population, and so they can really help sort of be a convener in that way. They're also a good training partner for people who are interested in starting stand-downs who haven't done it before. Nathaniel, who you'll hear from later, is a stand-down expert. He's been doing stand-down for a while, but his organization, MACV, is also an HVRP grantee, and they have a lot of experience on that side. And there are a lot of folks who have done stand-downs before who are willing to talk to people who haven't done a stand-down before and answer questions and help them figure that out. And we have a question that I'm seeing here about how you find if your local area has an HVRP grantee. While Nathaniel's talking, I'm going to look for the link to the Department of Labor site that has a list of all the grantees and see if I can put that link up for you. You could also search Department of Labor HVRP, and the grantees are listed there. And another question is around, do HVRP grantees charge for their services? HVRP grantees are nonprofit organizations generally who are serving veterans. We do have a couple of workforce agencies who have grants, but their job is part of their grant mission is to help homeless veterans find employment. And so working with stand-downs and doing this particular piece of the activity is part of what they do. So they would not charge you to work with them to help them create a stand-down or to work with you in creating a stand-down in your local community. The next partner that I want to talk briefly about is the American Job Center. I know we have a couple of American Job Center staff on the call as well. The American Job Centers are the Department of Labor's workforce centers. They used to be called one-stops in some places. They're called Career Source in other places. But they are focused on employment services. They do training, they do education, they do all sorts of employment services. At the American Job Center, there are two different positions that focus specifically on working with veterans. The Disabled Veterans Outreach Program Specialist, or DVOP as they're called, work directly with veterans who have an identified significant barrier to employment, or SBE. And one of those significant barriers to employment is homelessness. So as part of their job, DVOPs are required to do outreach into the community to find veterans with significant barriers to employment, including homeless veterans, and then to provide intensive services to them to help them find gainful employment. So in working with the American Job Center to support your stand down, that DVOP, by participating in your stand down, is going to be able to help provide employment services that you need, but it's also helping that DVOP fulfill his or her job responsibilities in outreaching to veterans and serving those veterans. So it really is a win-win for everyone for them to be involved. Working closely with the DVOPs are the local veterans employment representatives, the leavers, and they work to engage employers to find employment for veterans. And so there's a partnership there between the direct work with the veteran themselves and then working with employers to encourage them to hire veterans. So again, they would be a great connection and a great participant for your stand down to cover the employment side of things. The next partner, we're going to spend a few minutes on this one because I already mentioned them earlier, is the VA Medical Center. And it's essential that you work with your VA Medical Center, your local VA Medical Center, to plan your stand down. As I mentioned before, a lot of VA Medical Centers already do a stand down event of some sort, perhaps a health resources fair, so you really want to connect with them. When you're working with your VA Medical Center, you want to plan as early as possible. And I would suggest at least 8 months before you want to do your stand down, you're reaching out to your VA Medical Center, but the earlier the better. 6 to 9 months is a good time frame, but the earlier you can do that, the better. They can do a variety of things. They can do benefit screening for eligibility. They can provide medical services. There's a whole host of things that the VA Medical Center can do at your stand down. But what's really important is that before you go to the VA Medical Center, that you know exactly what kind of services you want them to provide and that you are very clear about that. If you reach out directly to, say, the medical center director and say, oh, we're hosting a stand down, can you send someone? They may send someone, but it may be someone who can only do benefits processing and can't actually help with setting up medical appointments. Or it may be someone who can do medical appointments but can't process, and vice versa. So you really want to be really clear about what you need. So if you want someone to do hepatitis screening, immunizations, as we mentioned before, you need somebody from the medical staff who is able to do that. If you want someone who's going to do benefit screening and sort of help people apply for benefits and make those connections, you're going to need a different kind of staff person to do that. If you want legal services, if you think that legal services are something that's really important based on the veterans in your community, then you're going to want to reach out to the Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist and make sure that they can be part of the stand-down as well. So it's really important to think about what kinds of services you want and who then would need to be there to provide those services. So in some cases, the homeless programs staff can provide all of those services at some medical centers. But at other medical centers, you're going to need to have somebody from the homeless program staff, somebody from the medical staff, somebody from the benefits staff. You really want to make sure that you're very clear about what you want and who you want it from. And you really want to talk about, you want to start early, keep those lines of communication open, keep the VA medical staff as involved as possible, and really focus on the benefit for everyone and the benefit for the veterans. That's why what's so important about this stand-down is getting as many services as possible to the veterans as efficiently as possible. Some other partners you may want to think about, community development boards, planning boards, business owners, other service agencies in your community. You may want to think that one thing that a lot of folks have done very successfully is engaged elected officials in their stand-down events. And that can look a different way depending on your community, but it is a really great opportunity to get perhaps your mayor or your county council members or your member of Congress involved in the effort to end veteran homelessness. If you go to www.hud.gov and search Mayor's Challenge, you can actually look up to see if your mayor has already, or local official has already signed on to the Mayor's Challenge to end veteran homelessness. If they have, this is a great way, getting them involved in your stand-down is a great way for them to further that message and that participation. But even if they haven't signed up for the Mayor's Challenge, having them at your stand-down is a great way to engage them in this work. A lot of stand-downs have sort of an opening ceremony kind of thing where it would be great to have an elected official speak, but also a lot of stand-downs at the end of the stand-down have kind of an open mic sharing closing session where folks talk about what the stand-down meant to them, and having an elected official there to hear from the veterans what this event meant to them can be really powerful and really push that official to engage even further in the work that you're doing on behalf of veterans. As far as the other partners that you want to engage, I really encourage you to be as creative as possible, and that means instead of thinking about, let's say, I need food for my stand-down, who can pay for food for my stand-down? Think about the things that you need, but think about creative ways that folks can solve that for you. So, for example, if you have employer partners that you work with, instead of just asking the employers for money, they may not be able to give you money for your stand-down, but they may be able to give you 25 volunteers who could serve food or could help set up tents or do those sorts of things. Maybe you have one of your employers is a packaging company and they have access to supplies or materials that you might need for your stand-down. So I really encourage you to be creative about what people can offer and how you can best use people. And if anyone comes to you and offers to help with your stand-down, I really, really think it's important to try and find a way for them to help. But that requires thinking creatively and thinking about the bigger picture of what needs to get done and what are the many ways that this could happen. With that, I'm going to pause for a second, and there's a bunch of questions that are coming through that I'm going to sort of pool. But I'm going to pause for a second, and what we're going to do is I'm actually going to introduce our guest speaker to talk about the sort of where the rubber meets the road, right? I've talked about in theory, but Nathaniel Saltz, the program director for Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans, is going to really talk about what that means practically on the ground. Nathaniel has been serving veterans experiencing homelessness as a MACV staff member since 2003. He's been a case manager for the HVRP program that I mentioned. He's been the grant and per diem coordinator, and now he's the program director. His duties within the organization have included operating and case managing veterans, statewide rollout and oversight of grant programs, and coordinating 10 annual Minnesota stand-down events. So with that, Nathaniel, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Cindy. I appreciate you having me on the call today, and thanks, everybody, for listening. We have been doing stand-downs at MACV. We started organizing stand-downs in 2006, and last year we organized 10 stand-downs throughout the state of Minnesota. So big difference between what we do in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities and what we do outstate in, say, International Falls, which is about as close to Canada as you can get and is a pretty small community. So you saw that picture of the San Diego stand-down where it's 4 days and it's a tent city and hundreds or thousands of veterans. International Falls looks a lot different. It doesn't have to be, I don't know where you're from and listening from, if you're some more rural communities or where you are, but some of our smaller ones go from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and we see about 100 people, 100 veterans, And it's, what do small towns in Minnesota have? We have hockey rinks. And we have bad weather. So instead of doing a tent city, we set it up in a hockey rink. And, they're absolutely perfect for the communities that we have and what the veterans and what the providers and that community needs as far as the stand down. So you're looking at the different definitions that Cindy was putting out there. And I think just without getting too caught up in whether you're a Class A or a Class F, just look at what it is that your community needs and how you can help fill that gap. And start small, adding as you go. And that's really what we did. Our Minneapolis stand down, when we started operating it, had about 200 veterans coming. And we've just looked every year, how can we improve our outreach? What additional services and partners can we add? And now we see about 1,000 veterans a year. And we've gone from about 25 providers to about 80 there, and really look at what we can do every single year to improve it and to get the partnerships in place that we need. I would really recommend to anybody thinking about doing a stand down, and I've done this a few times, I've always found it incredibly valuable, is to go to another stand down in a city that is similar in size and similar as a community to where you're planning a stand down, and see what they do. I think it's really hard to do a stand down without getting eyes on as to what it is you're trying to emulate and what you're trying to do, so that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, because there's so much good work being done nationally. And I've gotten great ideas that we've been able to implement by going and visiting, I think, Phoenix, I've seen Las Vegas, Columbus, Georgia, and every single time I've done that, I've gotten really great resources and really great ideas. So it's just focusing on what you need, and then decide, too, whether you want to have it be for all veterans or only homeless veterans. And what we've chosen is to open it up to all veterans, because there may be a Korean War veteran that's never accessed their benefits, and these benefit providers and all these people in one place, we definitely want veterans to come in and get these resources. However, we focus the outreach, we focus the resources so that if somebody's experiencing homelessness or another housing crisis, they're going to be able to get what they need at the stand down. As far as talking about partnerships, Cindy did a great job of covering that. There are a few others I would want to mention. Key partners will be your County Veteran Service Office, your State Department of Veterans Affairs, any services agencies that do housing within your area or employment that aren't the American Job Center as well, are great grant and per diem providers, SSVF providers. Veteran service provider organizations are great as far as getting it off the ground and doing outreach and reaching out and getting education about the veteran community as far as what the needs are. So talk to the veteran service organizations as well and get them on board with what you're doing, because they can really provide some outstanding guidance and support. And then looking at how to get the word out to veterans. So you've got a place, you've got your hockey rink, you've got your service providers coming, and then you need to get the veterans there. So how do you work on that? And that's through the partners as well, the veteran service organizations, but also any local shelters, your VA, your county veteran service officers, doing a press release. And we've done, even in some of our smaller communities where we're coming into it for the first time, we've done newspaper advertisements, and that's really been great as far as getting the word out. So we try to figure out as many ways as possible, where can we put our posters and flyers? Who's going to spread the word for us? And as you get going and have done it for a few years, really that veteran-to-veteran outreach is the key. The word of mouth spreads as people say, oh, yeah, I was there. That was awesome. You should go next time. Volunteers is another really critical thing to think about when you're putting together a stand-down, and volunteer management, and knowing ahead of time what you need the volunteers for. If you need them serving food, need them, we try to have people that can show the veterans around as to where the different service providers are, clean up, tear down, doing the surplus items, but clarifying that role for the volunteers before they get there. Otherwise, we find that they kind of follow you around like puppies saying, what can I do? What can I do? How can I be helpful? And you're just thinking the most helpful thing you can do is to take about 15 steps away from me, and that's about it. And so really looking at making sure that you know what your volunteer needs are and that the volunteers know what their roles are, because that makes a better experience for the volunteers as well. And they're really critical. We have hundreds of volunteers that are stand-downs, and we couldn't do it without them. And they come back every year. They enjoy doing it, and it's been a work in progress. So we've really gotten to a point where we've got that process nailed down, and the volunteers are amazingly useful. Another thing for volunteers, if they can't be there on site, gathering items, gathering those hygiene kits, blankets, winter gear. Cindy mentioned reading glasses. We've worked with our Blue Star moms here in Minnesota, and we learned this from the Phoenix stand down. They collect reading glasses, and they know how to do the reading tests so that they're giving the right strength away, and they distribute them at the stand down, and it's a really great partnership. Military surplus, I just mentioned. And another thing about volunteers is when you're reaching out to the community and you're reaching out to businesses, it's a great way. I know that she's going to be talking about stand-down development as far as getting money in another webinar, but that's a great way in, is if you have volunteers from some of the large employers, some of the large businesses in your area, then they have that hands-on participation, and they're going to be more likely to support the stand-down financially as well. And so it's really, it works in a lot of great ways. Military surplus is a huge procedure. So if you're thinking about doing this, I know it's going to be a huge draw. It's the most popular thing about the stand-downs. They're very, very focused on making sure only homeless veterans get that, so you need to plan for that if you're opening up the stand-down to more than a homeless, figuring out how to identify the homeless. If you decide that this is more than you want to look at doing for your first event, don't worry about whether it's a stand-down or a resource fair. Just it's what you're doing, and I'd still recommend calling it a stand-down because that's a word that people know and understand. But if it's going to be too much to do it that first time, don't do it the first time. It's a great thing to do, but don't let that stop you from doing a stand-down. Along with that, the hygiene kits, clothing, civilian clothing. We gather non-perishable food items, first aid kits, reading glasses. All these things are great items that you can put out there into the community. You don't have to do all this the first year, but eventually as you start getting that ball rolling, it's going to generate a lot of interest in your community, and you're going to start getting calls, people saying, what can I do? What can I do to help? And it's great to have some of these ideas. Well, we can always use non-perishable food items, granola bars, things like that the veterans can take with them. And then you have folks doing projects and getting more and more involved and more skin in the game with it. Deciding whether you want to do overnight shelter is a huge decision you'll have to think about. We do not at our stand-downs. We used to do one at our Minneapolis stand-down and found that it was way more trouble than it was worth for us, as we had just a few veterans staying, but the security, I'll just say the security was a big issue. If you're going to have everybody staying overnight like San Diego and some other stand-downs do, it's definitely something that you'd want to go and visit, see how other people do, talk to folks that do that. So you're getting that down logistically in a way that's great. But I don't think it's a necessary thing. We get veterans that come in that need shelter. We have transportation, and we have the shelter providers there on site. So we get them connected up without doing an overnight stay at our stand-downs. So with getting them there, the next item I had was transportation is another area that you're really going to want to think about. We have some shuttles that run to local shelters, and that's a big help. We also have gas cards and bus cards, which we get through our Department of Labor stand-down grant. Gas cards are critical in some of these rural areas where we may get a call from somebody that would love to come to the stand-down. They don't know how they can make it because of transportation issues. And if we can ahead of time mail them a gas card, hopefully they come. They usually do. And then they show up, and we're able to get those through that DOL funding. Providers is the other thing you're going to need to look at. So you can start small. Some of our smaller events have about 30 to 40 providers. We have over 80 providers that are Minneapolis event. And looking at anybody that provides in your area housing and shelter, veterans benefits, county veteran service officers, and veteran service organizations. Your public benefits. So how do people sign up for food stamps, for medical services, for their family, health and wellness services are a great thing to have too. In addition to the VA, if you have community providers that do mental health that can do free services or that can do on-site acupuncture or massage therapy, those are always very popular. Getting the VA medical to be out there doing blood pressure, they grab them. They'll grab people. You, get over here, you're doing your blood pressure. And then they can get them in and start talking to them about their health needs and what other things that they can have. Haircuts, employment, education, and with employment, we always try to get a few different employers in that have jobs. They're HR people that can talk to people and interview them on site. And legal is probably a whole other webinar. I don't know, Cindy, if you're going to be doing a webinar about stand-down legal. We've had some great things. We do a legal clinic with a stand-down tort component at all of our events. And some of the things we've been able to do because of the transient nature of the population, we've gone to our state Supreme Court and gotten a statewide jurisdiction so that it's not limited to the county or city where the stand-down is in, what legal issues they can look at. And because of this and because we are able to do it without having legal pre-registration and get all the information that we need when a veteran shows up on site. If anybody has more questions about how to go about setting up a legal clinic at the stand down, feel free to interview me and I'll put you in touch with Sarah Summerstrom, who's our Vet Law Program Director and coordinates our legal section. Other things to look at when you're doing the registration of the veterans coming into the stand down, to make sure that you are vetting that they're veterans. And so we have our VA regional office that looks folks up by their social if they don't have a DD-214 and can confirm it. I think if you don't have access to that type of thing right now, that Squares program, and if you've never heard of Squares, it's a new website registry through the VA, I don't know quite how to describe it, where you can put a veteran's information in, and it'll give you a yes or no that they're connected, that they've served. It's not maybe 100% accurate, but it's pretty close, and that at least gets you pretty close to knowing that the folks coming in, the folks getting the surplus items and using the services are veterans. And I think that's really important to be able to, for the service providers to know that they're serving veterans and to keep that focus there. Funding is a whole other webinar. And then really just looking at the flow. What can you do every time to make that flow a little bit better? What can you add? Even small things like we've picked up at another event that once people get their military surplus, we've always seen that they put the stuff on their back and they're out the door. So that stuff is heavy. And so we've started doing a bag check with volunteers. And instead of having to leave, they can then check their bag with their military surplus and their boots and their sleeping bag and continue to get services, and they don't have to make a choice about can they carry this stuff around with them or do they have to go home. And so I think just in summary, really look at what your community needs and how you can meet that needs. Don't be afraid to just start small and work from there so that you've got something going, so you can start getting that momentum. Reach out to your key partners and try to make it as great an event as you can, but do it with what you've got and with the resources that you've got. And I'll say it again, visit another stand down if you're able to do that, because that's a great way to really learn what it looks like and how it can flow and how it can operate. If anybody is interested in coming to our stand down here in Minnesota in the Twin Cities, you are definitely welcome. Contact me. It's August 2nd and 3rd, and love to see you. And Cindy, that's all I've got unless there are any questions for me.
Thanks, Nathaniel. There are a couple of questions coming through, or quite a few. I want to get through the last couple slides here, and then I'll start putting you in the hot seat, I guess you could say. Thanks so much for that information. I think Nathaniel's point about seeing a stand down for yourself is great, and also emphasizing that you don't have to do it all at once or your first time. It is a learning process, and it's a growing process. So starting with what you can do and when you can do it and moving on is a great thing. I just want to talk a couple minutes about some of the resources that we have available on our website, and then I'll get to those questions, as many as we can possibly answer. We have the founders made National Coalition for Homeless Veterans kind of the keeper of the stand-down materials. And so we have quite a few stand-down things available for you on our website. If you go to our homepage, which is www.nchb.org, you'll see right here on the right-hand side, on that bar on the side, it says Stand Down. And if you click on that, you'll have access to a number of resources that we have. That includes the Stand Down guide. There's a Stand Down overview, which has a sort of a program design manual and a piece on funding resources. Again, to reinforce what Nathaniel said, when you read one of these guides, one of them is based on the efforts in San Diego, which is a 4-day full stand-down that's been going on for 20 years, for a long time, not quite 20 years, but and they've grown and grown and grown. So what I would say is there's wonderful information there, but please don't read that and think, I have to do this or what I'm doing isn't valuable. That's what they're doing and that's what they've grown into, but as Nathaniel said, in Minnesota, they do a variety of different things based on the needs of each of the communities and based on their ability, and things grow over time. So don't think that you have to do it the way that it is done in San Diego, and that might not even be the best way for it to happen in your community. The other thing you'll see here on our webpage, there's a link to the stand-down notice of proposed event form. That's a place for you to actually register your stand-down with us, and we share it with the VA stand-down coordinator as well. So it gets posted on our website, and on there it's a way to publicize it as well. And there's also a place there to do an after-action report, which just talks about what happened during your stand-down, you know, a way to sort of report the progress of your stand-down. This is again, on the bottom of that stand-down page of our website, this is where you'll see, like, the posted events of stand-downs to come for the year. As you can see, this is the end of 2015, but we're in the process of updating all the 2016 ones. And as you register and as we work with the VA, some folks register with us and we share it with the VA, and some folks register with the VA and they share it with us. But we do try to keep a comprehensive list so that you can go in and see if there is one nearby that you want to go visit, as Nathaniel had suggested, one's coming up that's fairly close and fairly soon. That would be a great way to go visit a stand-down. So there's a ton of information and resources there available for you. If you want to advertise with us, you go to that webpage and fill out that form, as I mentioned, and you can fax it or email it to us, to Kurt, and then you can actually get your stand-down advertised with NCHB. And that also does go in our print newsletter that goes out to our network, so you would get that as well. So now's our point for questions, and I do have a couple, Nathaniel, that I'm going to sort of toss to you at least to start with. One of them was asking, given that the military surplus items are harder to get to and take longer, do you have other suggestions of good ways to draw veterans in, since those surplus items are often one of the most popular things or one of the big draws to get veterans to come to a stand-down?
Well, I think I'm thinking, you know, a lot of times there's a little bit of a disconnect as far as putting on a stand-down. We want to connect up veterans to housing, employment, all these great resources, and sometimes a veteran coming in is coming to get a sleeping bag, and we connect them up with these services, even though that may not be their number one reason for showing up. So having something else as being a draw, it could be things, civilian clothing, other things we're giving away. I think other things that are a huge draw are legal services. People come for legal services. People come for food, having all these things on site. And everything else you have, the resources are going to be a draw, but sometimes that takes a little bit longer as far as developing word of mouth and developing those relationships and that knowledge about what you're doing in the community. So I think just consistency, being in the community, having those relationships, they're going to get people in. The homeless shelters are going to want their homeless veterans going to your stand-down. The county veteran service officers are going to want their veterans coming to the stand-down. So trying to educate as many ways as you can about the services that you have and putting it out there and being consistent, that marketing and outreach is going to be really key. Even if you don't have the surplus, I think that it's still going to be very effective to get folks in.
And you sort of partially answered the next group of questions, which was around good ideas or good ways to market or advertise your stand down. You mentioned going through local homeless shelters, connecting to the County Veteran Services Office. So it sounds like those are some ways to advertise it, not just with the veterans themselves, but to other folks that may come in contact with homeless veterans and might be able to encourage them to attend.
Sure. American Legion posts, VFW, DAV, all these posts are going to be great ways to connect up. You can do outreach depending on your community, the faith community, churches, other areas, things like that could be a great way to reach out to get the word out with flyers or letting them know that this is going on. I think if you do a press release, if you can do any sort of radio, we've had people coming in, they hear about it on a radio show that airs at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Who knew people were awake and listening to radio at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning? But they are, and they hear about the stand down. And so as many ways that you can think about, as many partners, the SSBF programs and Grant per Diem, if you have those, anybody that comes in contact with the homeless, food shelves, are going to be great ways to get the word out.
Great. Thank you, Nathaniel. We had a couple of folks who wanted to hear a little bit more information about the gas cards or the gift cards that you had mentioned.
Okay. We get them through, and that you'll hear about on the other webinar, the Department of Labor stand-down grant, that HVRP stand-down grant, maybe it was called, and they've got money they're trying to give away, so it's go in and get it. And part of one of the allowable expenses on that is transportation expenses, and so we just put it in there and we purchase a whole bunch of them. If people need them when they're there, we have them to give out. And you can even put it on the flyer. If transportation is an issue, please contact this number and talk with folks that may need those cards. If you're in a rural area, they may not be able to get a gas card from you. Maybe you've got to mail it out or mail them, have some at County Veteran Service offices or homeless shelters in the area or other places that homeless people, individuals or veterans may frequent so that they can just go there rather than pass them out to get one. It gets a little deep. That'll be a lot to manage logistically because they are a limited and valuable resource, and you want to make sure that you're using them as best you can. But they're very helpful to get people there, and also very helpful as a draw to get people there.
Great. Thank you, Nathaniel. The other question that we had from a couple of folks is they wanted more information about squares. So perhaps, Nathaniel, if you can type it to me in the chat box, I'll post it, or if not, we'll put it in the fact sheet for everyone to see afterwards so that you can access squares and know more information about that. I did want to mention a couple of things because we are just about out of time, and this has come up quite a few times, is we do have a webinar next week. It's on Thursday, the 21st, again, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this one is specifically geared to stand-down financing. We are going to have a guest speaker from Department of Labor Vets. Nathaniel was just mentioning the stand-down grant money there. Shirley Snyder, who's the competitive grants analyst over at DOL Vets, is going to be on the call. And we're going to be talking about DOL funding and that application process, and also connecting with the VA and getting VA resources. So there'll be a lot of information about sort of that side of things and the application process that goes if you are applying for funding. And just as sort of a teaser, again, there will be an emphasis there on planning early. It does take a while to go through the process. But as Nathaniel said, there is money there that is available for stand-downs, and so you'll hear a lot more about that next week. We are hearing a little bit about, I'm hearing some questions about how do you register for next week. There will be a new link to register for next week, but everybody who registered for today's webinar will also get information about next week. I'm sort of assuming you might be interested, and if you're not, then you don't have to join. But if you are on this call and registered through the process to get to this webinar, you'll get information about next week's as well, so you won't have to double do that, save you a little bit of steps there. I also want to thank Nathaniel for his time and his expertise. He did a great job of really giving some practical knowledge and wisdom and expertise about how you can go about doing this. As he said, you do not have to go back to those classifications that I talked about and said, well, I can't do, this, this, and this, so I can't do a stand down. Really think about what are the things that you can do and that you want to do and that are helpful for the veterans in your community, and that will be different in different places, and start there. And work with other folks. We are here to answer questions at NCHV. Nathaniel has offered to answer questions as well, although he does have a lot on his plate, so I would say you can ask me or Nathaniel. But really, we really encourage you to, stand-downs are really valuable events. Going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, there is a sense of community and purpose and connection that happens at a stand-down. As Nathaniel said, he has folks that once they volunteer once, they want to keep coming back. It is a special thing that happens there, and that's what we want to create for veterans. Giving them the services is important, and it's great, but the heart of the stand-down is that connection and that feeling of camaraderie and safety and security. So I have our contact information here for both Nathaniel and I. If you have any questions around the HVRP program specifically, you can direct those specifically to me. But it is 3:01, and I want to respect everyone's time. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm going to keep that open for a few minutes. I will be sending the survey later this afternoon, so if anything else pops into your head that you wished you had asked and you hadn't, or we just didn't get a chance to answer, please put that in the survey. There'll be a sort of an additional comments piece, the last question of the survey. And with that, thank you again, Nathaniel. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for the work that you're doing on behalf of veterans. It is important work, and you don't always get thanked for it, and so I just want to say that we at NCHB appreciate you and everything that you do. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.